You are listening to the Data Blast podcast for the week of January the 19th, 2020. On this episode, we talk Star Trek Picard, more trouble with Star Wars, Germany forgetting to update Windows 7, and more.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Data Blast podcast. Here, wherever you're listening to it, whether that's on Gambit or in these chunks on YouTube. We got some fun news and controversial news a little bit as well, and some video game news and some movie news, kind of everything rolled up in this week's episode. But we're going to start off with kind of the biggest story of the week, if not probably the entire month, and that is Star Trek. We've known about Star Trek having its ups and downs over the past couple of years, but now it's ventured back into television, and we're not talking about Discovery, whatever they are doing. We're talking about TNG era Star Trek coming back. The first series in that kind of, I guess, the prime timeline since Voyager went off the air, and that is Star Trek Picard. It debuted this week. And the reviews that I have seen online have been fairly positive. They haven't, I think the best way that I could describe it is kind of the way I described it in our review, which you could read over at gambitmag.com, is that it's not so much boldly going as it's tiptoeing back into the Star Trek world. And I noted this because when Discovery came on the air a few years back now, you remember that actually debuted on television before heading over to CBS All Access. And that introduction was actually not the beginning of the series, right? It was like episode 2 or 3, I think, in it, because it was the Battle of the Binary Stars. So you got a show that right off the bat was Star Trek 2009 reboot in terms of action, nonstop action. And every time I kind of jump into Discovery again, it's even season 2, episode 1, where I'm just slowly getting back into it. It's got a lot of action beats, and it is for what I describe new Trek, new people coming into Trek, right? The younger generation that has grown up with, I guess, the best way to say it is a CGI world, right? We're long gone are the days of models and small budgets and network television kind of standards and requirements. So the days of Star Trek just aren't here anymore. You're not going to get an episode of Star Trek where phasers aren't being fired and torpedoes aren't being launched.
Well,
in some, I mean, you can, but you're not going to see it.
No, you'll see it on Hulu from the Orville.
Oh, you'll see it if you want Star Trek. Just watch the Orville.
Yeah,
especially the new season.
Is that out yet?
I don't know if it's out yet, but they've said they're going more traditional in terms of what they wanted and leaving the comedy that Fox required of them.
Good.
So that if you like the show the first season, you're going to like it better. But for Star Trek, the idea of not seeing phasers or phasers sounding like laser blasts from Star Wars is a thing of the past, I guess, which is crazy to me because Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home, nothing was fired.
Yeah, there's very little like weapons, anything in that movie. It's mostly
there's no Enterprise.
It's all character bits.
It's all character bits. There's no fire. There's no attacking. There's no giant battle.
It also features the only cursing that's worth a damn in Star Trek.
That's right, and it's just about getting some whales home. You could never imagine J.J. Verse and the Enterprise never firing a shot for a whole film.
I can't.
You can't see that. And even the greatest, The Wrath of Khan, which is the greatest Star Trek film, period. And
it's literally 2 fights
and considered one of the top 10 greatest science fiction films of all time. Like, it's that good. Like, it's not better than 2001 in my book, but it is in the top 5 for me, hands down.
Oh, it's
that
probably
good.
my favorite of the Star Trek movies.
And there's only a couple shots, right?
Yeah,
a couple phasers are shot.
I mean, the way I think of it, it's the first encounter between the Enterprise and the Reliant,
right?
And then there's a bit,
and then again it stops for a good chunk of it.
There's a bit with the what was it? The what are they called? Khan puts them in their ears.
Oh, the little worm things, the
Yes.
mind parasite things.
No, but they have a name, but I can't.
They have a name. They're in Star Trek Online.
One of those gets shot, and that's the scene
And that's-
that
yeah,
Gene
and that's-
Roddenberry hated.
That's the phaser fire. And that, I mean, and even if you're going back, the original Star Trek film, I don't think the Enterprise fires at all going to the V'ger thing, right? I know the Klingons do.
No, they do fire one photon torpedo because I think Kirk was planning on doing something by
They
firing
shoot
the
it in the
phasers.
wormhole
Yes,
to get
So-
them out of the wormhole, but not in an attack. Right.
And he
exactly.
orders phasers, and then Decker's like, "No, not phasers.
And it gets
Photon
that's the weirdest part of the film.
torpedo."
The film's already slow, which I love Star Trek 1 because it's so close. It's so inspired by
the director's
2001: A
cut
Space
is the best.
Odyssey. Right. It's just like it's 2001's version of Star Trek. People say, "Oh, it's running off the success of Star Wars." Yes, in terms of science fiction being popular again.
Yeah.
But
It's the human adventure.
the writers and the directors were just like, "Hey, 2001 was great.
Just
We're going to do that." There's
trailer
15
for that
minutes.
movie.
There's 15 minutes of just looking at the Enterprise.
The trailer of that movie is just
It's crazy. So you're never going to see that, and you're never going to see TNG era Star Trek again. Which is again, sometimes the Enterprise doesn't shoot a single shot. Sometimes phasers aren't even used. It's a dramatic show. It's a drama, not trying to infuse action. I mean, to be fair, a lot of it is because they had the limitations, right? They had a budget. Yeah. You can't have a bunch of ships. You can't, which is why
that's the bottle episode in a nutshell.
Which is why Star Trek, old Star Trek, used to be great because the purists could watch their TV shows, and then the movies had the budgets, and that's where you would get your fight scenes. And that was fine. It was like a long episode, and it goes pew pew, whatever. Now it's TV, which is all film inspired, and you have to shoot around all the time. So Picard comes out. I didn't love it, but I didn't hate it. I gave it a C+ overall in my review, and I mean that because Picard isn't a traditional Star Trek show. Even Discovery is a traditional Star Trek show in its format of
we go
ship,
places and do
crew. We go places, right? You might not like where they go or how they do it, but in terms of how Star Trek is on television, it is a Star Trek kind of based show. Picard is none of those things. And I don't know if in the long run that's going to help it or hinder it, because people want to see Picard, but they want to see him as captain of a vessel in the traditional Star Trek sense. And this introduction to him after the past 20 years was personally kind of boring because, and I don't mean that even in a negative way, because I've been saying for a long time, and I've been saying this of Star Wars too, it needs to slow down, right? It needs to be like The Mandalorian and just take a step back, forget the bigger world, and just focus on like one character doing their thing. But The Mandalorian is still Star Wars. It is still a guy, some guns, some cool ships, cool creatures, right?
It's still space western.
It's still space western.
Yeah.
Picard feels like a CBS drama that could be airing anytime.
With no sci-fi anything in it.
Right. Like if you pull all the sci-fi elements out and keep the story the same in a modern day setting, which you could at
least for the first episode.
You could tweak it into a modern day setting. You wouldn't lose anything, right? You wouldn't lose what the show was doing. And I don't know if that's what I want.
I know it's not what I want, but
The problem
I'm not getting.
is I went into CBS All Access to watch it. I didn't know anything about the show going in, and by that meaning, I didn't know about any spoilers or anything like that. But I also didn't know the length that was planned out. Right? I was assuming that this was an opener. It would probably be an hour, maybe 2 hour special, or something in that nature. And in my review, I note that because I took notes as I was watching, and I was bored to tears so much in the show because of the pacing that just felt like it moved at a glacial pace. And I looked at the timestamp when I finished writing and taking my notes. The show was only 45 minutes long.
I know that feeling.
It was a traditional TNG era episode length. And yet I felt like I was stuck in a movie theater for 2 hours. Because just some of the parts were just so... I don't know the best way to describe it. Almost like maybe like a Star Wars feel to it, because it wanted you to focus on everything else but what you want to focus on, right? You got cool ships or cool like technology happening. You have the vineyard is there, and there's lots of stuff happening, but nothing is happening, right? And I had an interesting experience with it because I went to watch it with my family, and my mom grew up on Star Trek with me. And I mean, she's the person we watched, Discovery season 2, the first episode with some weeks back, finally having some downtime. And she really didn't react to season 1 that much. She watched it and watched actually more of it than I did and was like, this is fine. Like, didn't say anything, didn't mention things to me. But when we were watching Disco's season 2 and the Enterprise shows up, the only time I've heard her talk during the whole series is like, oh, that's the Enterprise. How cool.
Yeah.
And because that's what she was expecting. In this, there are no moments of like, whoa, cool. Or like, Picard doesn't feel like Picard. And I know that's the point because it's 20 or something years later.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that's what I wanted or if everyone wants. And this is set up like a show for the fans. And it leaves out non-fans. And I mean that because while my mom and I were like, oh, this is cool seeing him again. This is interesting. Or, oh, I remember the vineyard, from the final episode. Or, is that Data? Or,
episodes, actually.
My mom remembers like, oh, yeah, didn't Data paint a lot, right? When he went to when he saw the painting in his house and ran to the record, she was like, hey, didn't Data paint, right? So these things were clear to us. My dad is disinterested in anything Star Trek, right? He can't follow that sort of science fiction. He just doesn't care for it. He remembers Star Wars. He took us to see Star Wars as a family for Christmas again. He loves Star Wars because it's a Western in space, right? And he watches. Yeah. He goes throughout the day to watch the Western Channel on local television, right? That's his stick. He's like, if it's a Western, he's going to sit down. So he can watch Star Wars because that's essentially what it is. That's why he loved Han Solo movie and stuff. It's just a Western.
Yeah.
And he couldn't give a rat's ass about this show. So it's clearly not designed for new fans or new people to come into this series because, and I think one of the biggest disservices it does is what I was afraid that was going to happen with Picard. And it's trying to tie everything together. And I'm not talking about just TNG. I'm talking about everything. We're talking mentions of the JJ universe in stuff. Not only visually, we see how Starfleet is going. We the whole thing around the Hobus supernova. We see. It's strange, but I think we all knew it was going to be surrounded the aftermath of the fall of Romulus. You can't avoid it. That's kind of
we're stuck with it now.
We're
even Star Trek Online is stuck with it, but
we're stuck with it. And for how much I actually enjoy the JJ verse for just being fun movies on their own, it's still tainted Prime Trek because Romulus is gone. Right? It's
the thing. You can do things with that and make it interesting.
But they're not.
But I don't feel they're going to.
And that's the problem, is that's not the point of Picard. We thought okay, cool. That's going to have ramifications on the Federation. We know he left Starfleet. It probably has to do with Romulus, right? because we know from the TV show Spock was trying for reunification.
Yeah.
And we knew Picard was involved in trying to make peace with Romulans. And even in the last film, the big scene of him in the Romulan Senate being the first person that he mentions, like, this is a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
So this is important to him as a character. But that's not what this is about. This is about Data.
Yeah.
This is Star Trek Data. And what I mean by that is Picard is a bystander in the greater events around him. He isn't leading, he isn't pushing, he isn't doing anything. And we saw hints, and we actually talked about this, and you wrote a little bit about this when some of the leaks came out about Star Trek Picard.
Yeah.
And we knew that a lot of the talk started going around Mars, right? It started to come around like, well, something terrible happened to Mars, and people started connecting the dots. And we know something happens during the battle of Sector 001, right? And that was mentioned in, I guess a lot of it is in secondary material, but we know that the first line of defense was Mars. And then they fall back to, Earth. And there's mentions of that.
Where the line must be drawn.
Right, in First Contact, like when he's listening in and, they said, oh, Defiant, Bozeman, regroup and push back to Sector whatever, 001. So we know something happens on Mars. And the idea that it was never talked about because it was only a film thing, fans started kind of connecting the dots and saying, well, the Borg must have pushed through, probably destroyed Utopia Planitia, probably leveled Mars before, heading out. Well, that didn't happen.
No.
Apparently, the Borg...
That would make sense.
Fought some ships at Mars, blew them up, and then went to Earth. I know they're one-dimensional in that respect, so it's a movie Borg and not TV Borg. I get it. That's fine.
That's fine.
But something else happens to Utopia Planitia that just sat wrong with me. Like, just the concept of it. And what I mean by that is Data is dead. Right? If you guys watch Nemesis...
He's been dead for 20 years.
He's dead. Like, his arc was one of, I think, one of the best arcs in television history.
Yes.
In terms of character.
That was the best part of that movie.
Right. You're introduced to Data, and he is an android. He is a Soong android. Very clear he's an android. I'm going to touch back on this again. He's an android.
Fully functional and anatomical.
And he's fully functional.
There's a song.
And his arc throughout the entire series, which is only his, right? Other people are bit players in that helping him because everyone should get an arc, even though he's the only one really with an arc.
One of my favorite things is that little clip. I keep using like the 5-hour clip of him laughing where Q's like, I want to give you a present.
Right, when he gives him like emotions for the first time without the chip. And then he stops and forgets about it. So there's really cool arc for 7 years of him becoming more human and knowing as an audience member that he can never become human because he's an android. Mm-hmm. But come Nemesis, which, I mean, there's a cool fight scene and Tom Hardy's just brilliant as always. Thank God he's in the movie because everything else is stupid. Data completes his arc from the TV show through the movies by willingly, without question, sacrificing himself for Captain Picard. Like, he knows that he's not coming back from this. Everything he does in that final section of Nemesis is him going the only reason to save his friend. Mm-hmm. Right? If you look at this from a Spock situation or from early Data situation, it's something he would never do. Right? It's until his arc is there. It's kind of the same idea. That he would probably never do that yet because it wouldn't, I guess, be logical or it doesn't make sense. We should be doing something. But he just says, Picard leaves and he says, fuck it. He gives him the ship and he just says, Geordi, come with me. And he's like, I got to save my friend. And so he sacrifices himself. That's over. It's done. It is a beautiful arc that's completed with a hint of the future with a B4, right? Yeah. Because it's that Wrath of Khan again shtick where Spock and McCoy and now B4 shows up, which is never explained, which is the stupidest part of the film, to be perfectly honest with you, because just another Soong android is out there.
He made a bunch of them and then
Tom Hardy found them somehow and put them, on a planet where Picard, Worf, and Data broke every rule in Starfleet going down and messing with these people.
In a dune buggy.
in a dune buggy. Fuck the Prime Directive, whatever. And so his arc was completed. It was great, and they left that B4 thing. And I was okay with that because you always want to leave, like, you want to leave something. It's a fun little hint.
You need to leave little strings.
Right, that maybe, you know, and again, they didn't know if they were going to make another movie because of, you know, if that was going to be the end, but you know how Hollywood is. If it makes a lot of money, they'll make another one. And it didn't make a lot of money.
No.
And so his arc was done, and it was fine. And then the comics come around. And the comics are tricky in terms of Star Trek, because unlike Star Wars, where there's an expanded universe and none of that is considered canon, right? Star Trek is a little different because it picks and chooses what it considers canon. And the JJ verse comes around, and people are in an uproar about, oh, this isn't my Trek, this is not connected. And then, of course, the whole film connects to that. But the prequel comics called Countdown leading into that explain what Picard was doing on the Enterprise, how Spock, you know, how they got the red matter, and they kind of give a bigger backstory on the Narada and on Eric Bana's character, and how his ship is so weirdly powerful and big, and being Borg, and how they were captured by the Klingons, and there's like cool backstory going on. And then Paramount says, yes, this is a prequel leading into this canon. Picard got the same thing. So it got like a 4-issue, I believe, run leading into this show, which was cool. It was fine. And I think they build it the same way, as this is the story leading into that. The problem is, I don't know if it was rewrites, I don't know if it was timing, but everything gets now all fucked up in this kind of new continuity, because in the comics, I think I saw some of them, I haven't read them all, but like B4 has been in charge of like the Enterprise, and Geordi's at Utopia Planitia, like building this fleet. And in the TV show, we know Utopia Planitia is destroyed. Geordi's not mentioned. So story-wise, things already are beginning to fall apart. But the problem that I want to circle back to is the Mars problem, is what I'm calling it. And that is, it wasn't the Borg. It wasn't the Romulans, although it probably has an influence. Both of those people, something's going to happen.
Yeah, it seems like it.
Cause the problem. But it was, and I want to say how the show calls them is synthetics.
Synths.
And as soon as I heard the word synths, I was out. I was checked out 100% story-wise for a couple of reasons. Because it's stupid. Completely stupid in this timeline.
Yes.
And the word doesn't fit Star Trek. We've already been through a situation of trying to prove that Data was human, he's an android, right? You had the trial in TNG, yes. You had all these other moments.
Bruce Maddox.
Right. You had these like things that say, yes, he is a sentient life form, and eventually, even in the show, he gets command, right? He gets command of the Sutherland for that when they're building the tachyon grid. So, I mean, part of his story is great. Synths are not Star Trek. Since the first time I heard that, I immediately thought of Blade Runner. Like the show writers were just like, man, Blade Runner was so cool. Let's use synths. Because a lot of the ideas in Blade Runner is how they work with synths and like tracking them down, I feel like is in Picard, at least that's where it's going. And it's also straight out of something like, Snatcher, right? Kojima's Snatcher. Oh, yes. Which Snatcher was, of course, based off of Blade Runner.
Blade Runner, yeah.
And so when I hear the word synths, it doesn't make any sense. And one of the conceits of Star Trek is that Data is unique. He is his model, whatever happened, he is unique, right? Dr. Soong, whatever he did, maybe a little of his essence. We don't know what the heck, how the positronic brain works.
Nobody
right?
does.
Lore,
not even Data. He tries to make his own daughter in one episode. It doesn't work.
Right.
And she falls apart.
Right. He makes Lal, and Lore is like based on him, but he was with an emotional chip and still not quite the same. And then you saw B4 come out, which is totally like prototype and totally like just not Data. He is the only thing. So post TNG season 7, the Federation now has created synths. has created synthetic life forms. Something I'm pretty sure, I don't know if it was ever stated, but is like pretty sure, maybe I read it in supplementary materials, is a big no-no in terms of the Federation and how they function, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think it's mentioned, and I could be wrong in a book or something, like slave labor in a sense. Like, you're building these simply for...
Well, that's the entire point of that episode, where
right.
they're arguing whether or not he's a sapient being.
Yes, and we also have this in Voyager.
That.
We also have this in Voyager when the Doctor like meets his own creator, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, "Well, you're the point of you guys, the holographic Doctor, your Model 1 was a failure.
Yes,
none of you are on any ships anymore.
They wound up all getting transferred to some mining colony or whatever."
Right, and it's like, well, Starfleet figured that you're not real, so now you're basically slave labor, and since you're not real, it's fine. But creating a synth doesn't fucking make sense.
Yeah.
And it's built off of data. Like, once data's positronic brain, and they go into scientific like technobabble of, well, if he had one neuron of one positronic neuron,
they're going to use that as an excuse.
They turn him into fucking Wolverine, right? If he blows up, if he blows one drop of blood of Wolverine, he's going to come back. Like, it's just all complete and utter bullshit. And then, of course, you have the situation where the synths turn rogue for no reason. Apparently, Starfleet has no backups. These things are... there's no off switch. And they shut down Mars grid, and everything goes boom, boom, right? We see ships that we don't know. They could be Romulans. They could be anything. And they blow up the Utopia Planitia Arts. Mind you, in the comics, Geordi is stationed there running things. We don't know if he's dead. The fallout from the station, they attack the planet. 100,000 people are dead, right?
They have no one running continuity.
There's no ships. I mean, we're talking like small fighters, which is a problem in of itself because they don't make sense in a Star Trek world. But granted, I'm sure other races and cultures in the universe of Star Trek probably have fighters. That's fine. There's no ship at Utopia Planitia, right? It's the Enterprise problem from the films. Like, there's only one ship in the sector.
Yeah.
Every supplementary material that I've ever read, going all the way back, has said that Starfleet, with the requirement is to always have one ship near Earth, right?
Mm-hmm.
One within the sector case. And it's usually the Hood was the ship that's always mentioned as the one being around. So none of that happens. Blows up, and the fallout is Starfleet says, we're not helping the Romulans. Your fleet's gone. We're not helping them. Hobus, boom, bang, whatever. I'm sure it's probably one of the reasons why the red matter incident happens, because now the Federation has fallen and isn't helping people that need it. And then Picard gives this, it's their way of trying to connect to today's world. Like, it doesn't matter who they are, they're still lives. There's that line where he's talking to the interview, and she says, the Romulan lives. And he says...
The interview I hated.
Yeah, the interview it was dumb, but it was. I understand the tie, because Star Trek always tries, the TV shows at least try to tie to modern day, and she says, "Hey, the Romulan lives," and he says, "Their lives," right?
They're usually more subtle about it.
They tend to be a little more subtle, but that's it's a migrant issue being talked about. Fine, I get it. The destruction of Romulus kind of makes that very juicy, and you can't really ignore it because they got to go somewhere. Mm-hmm. So the synthetic situation doesn't make a lot of sense, and it's bad. And this is all before the crux of what is going to happen in Picard is set up. This is just backstory, right? Mm-hmm. Picard leaves because of Romulus, and his fleet's gone. Starfleet isn't going to help him. His best friend is Data's dead, and now his sort of, I guess, proto-kind that Starfleet is working on for some reason went rogue, right? And so he's gone.
Can I circle back to the androids?
Yeah, circle back. Go ahead. Not the synthetics.
They keep using the word... Yeah, well, synths. They keep using the word sentient.
Yes.
In the episode. If you didn't make a sentient android, you kind of failed at making an android.
Wouldn't it just be like a cyborg then, right?
it would just be a robot.
Right, it's just a robot,
Because-
which is like what we have now, which would, I guess, be fine.
What you want is a sapient android, which is what Data was.
Yes, they don't understand. The terms they're using are very generic to try to get people to understand.
That is usually a mark of someone who doesn't really understand sci-fi.
Why are we even making Datas in the first place? You know what I mean? Like the Federation. I love TNG.
Yeah.
That's my favorite series. I grew up with it. It was one of the series that actually helped me learn to speak English because I'm not from here, right? It was that on all the time in syndication, and that's one of the things. So there's a connection to me. But when you grow up and look back on TNG, discounting the really stupid episodes, which there was a lot of stupid episodes in
God,
television show. You can't be on 7 seasons and not have some real bad ones, especially when you're
and a lot of them are front loaded in the first 2 seasons.
Right. There's some bad ones. But it was Starfleet at its best and at its worst.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that, it is and the Star Trek writers themselves fed off of that going into Deep Space Nine a lot, in that the Federation was essentially perfect. It was still Gene Roddenberry's version of where humanity was, right? Earth is perfect. It's a goddamn paradise. The Federation will always stand up for what's right. And that's what made Picard such an impressive person. And the show mentions like, oh, he was a tactical and military. No, he wasn't. Not at all. What he was a diplomat and incredibly smart, and would find ways to the best of his abilities not to use force.
Though right? When he did have tricks up his sleeve. He actually has a maneuver named after him.
Right. And it's maneuver. But he wasn't like a military. He wasn't Patton, is what I'm saying.
He was a great pilot.
You could say like Riker could have been that, which is fine, right? That was his other guy saying like this is how
he was a big scrappy dude.
But it wouldn't be Picard, so that annoyed me there. But what TNG showed was that the Federation had gotten soft, right? And maybe Picard might have been the best of us, but that really wasn't what was best for Starfleet. And I say that because it was an era of peace, right? The Klingons were no longer a threat. They were dependent on the Federation. The movie saw to that with the destruction of Praxis, right? They needed the Federation help. They didn't like it, but were still tight allies. The Romulans were essentially not in the series until the finale of season 1, right? When they showed up.
And even so, then it's a tentative.
And it was just like, oh, look, we're here.
Tensions are rising.
Right. So they're out of the picture. And in this timeline, the Cardassian border wars were essentially border wars, right? So there was no one to match the Federation in power, in strength. And they got soft. And they got soft because the Enterprise E is the flagship. And they put families on board, right?
On the E or on the D?
On the D. And so there was no there's no military in the world put families on the ship for a reason.
Oh God, no. Yeah.
Right. It made sense at the time because the Galaxy class was this massive, huge ship that was powerful, but also was the face of the Federation. Because look, when we're going to make contact, look, our families are here with us. We understand, yada yada yada. And so Star Trek became this perfect world, and Deep Space Nine kind of changed that. And so I don't know if you could do that kind of Picard, which they aren't. They're trying to do something different, but they're not making it about Picard. They're making it about Data. This is Data's show, and we see this in the first half, and everything up to this point that we've talked about was utterly just boring and terribly written. And it got worse. I audibly cringed and like had to just like go get some water just to walk away when everything then becomes so warp speed after all this that we learn about Picard, because this feels like it takes a long time, but it's probably only like 20 minutes.
Yeah.
But it felt like forever, just the way the show was cut and edited. And then we get this girl, and you've seen her in the trailers.
Yeah.
That, well, the question was, is she Picard's daughter?
Nope.
Is she Hugh's like offspring? Is she something? Clearly she is
The one
something.
I saw is she Borg?
Is she Borg?
Because they were showing Borg cubes and
Right. Is she like a cross between a Borg and a Ron? Is she something? Well, she turns out to be a sleeper agent, which is hack because
yeah,
it just we
It's
see
so
that all the
played out.
time. It's a sleeper agent. Oh no, they got activated. Oh no, they don't know who they are.
Oh
The
no, they
second
can
she is
do blind kung
activated,
fu.
she goes directly to Picard, who's in France. And I
Yeah.
don't know where she is, but she's not in France. So
No.
she goes to fight in Picard. And the scene where they first meet is one of the worst written things I have ever seen. And I mentioned in my review that segment, and it gets better after this, but that whole segment is just like one word interactions between them. Or like just a quick phrase between them, like, who are you? What are you? How do you know? Like, it's like exposition dump, but like so generic. And the way Patrick Stewart
Do
is
you know
acting it
me?
up, like, is so like intense. Like, I know this person, which up to this point, he doesn't. He
Yeah.
hasn't, she's the one having visions. He's just an old dude. And that exchange is just so badly done and just so Shakespearean. And I say that Patrick Stewart is great in this acting wise. I think it's some of his best acting on television just to begin with, because he's left Star Trek and he's done more theater work and all this sorts of thing. He's great as an actor. But that section and some of the bad speeches that he gives feel like he is doing like bad Shakespeare on the Park and acting for the people in the cheap seats.
Yeah.
And if you know theater at all, it's different because it's a very emotive. It's big, right? You're loud and you're expressive in your arms because you're a little person on the stage, and
you have to be big personality.
Yeah, they teach you this kind of in theater. You want to reach the people in the back, right? Less so now with mics and everything, but you still want to, like, you're acting to the people in the back. And that's what it felt like up to this point. We end up finding out she is somehow connected to Data. We find this out from Picard because he apparently knows all this. And this is where things start moving so fast. I'm trying to remember it exactly, but like, she comes for help because she sees a vision. He's like, what are you? Oh God, something. And then she bails. And then she comes right back and meets him at, where are they? They're at the research or the archives, right?
Yeah.
She finds him again. And as soon as she comes back, he goes, I know who you are. You're Data's daughter. She's like, no, I have a mother and father. She's like, no, you're Data's daughter. He was my friend, and I'm going to be here for you forever.
There was a painting.
It was a painting
that he made 30 years ago.
Like, the way he says it is so not Picard.
By the way, it's the quantum archives.
It's the quantum archives, right?
Why?
And it's which is dumb in and of itself, but it's just basically just a giant fucking safe deposit box.
Mm-hmm.
It's just safe deposit boxes, which my dad said, which I thought was funny. And
It's
he goes full 100% in on this is Data's daughter.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing we have is the portrait that Data painted back on the Enterprise D some like 20, 30 years ago. Okay, there's a tangential connection there. It's something that should be explored. It's a cool string to be pulling. But for Picard, as who he is, to just 100% jump into that is the most un-Picard maneuver ever possible. You know what I mean? Like, something would happen on TNG and Picard would be like, I need all the information possible.
Gather information.
Give me more.
Am I ready?
What are the readings? Tell me what you think. What do you think? Which is the great dynamic of a show like that is, the captain feeds off. You don't have that here. And apparently when you don't have that here, he just is fucking the most gullible man in the world. And he says, we're all in. Let's do this. You're Data's daughter. From there, the show gets its first big action beat, which I have issues with. Not the battle itself, but I have issues, which I'll talk about in a second. You get the big action beat that's shot at San Diego Comic-Con on the steps in the back. And I go to Comic-Con. I've been there almost, 10 years going. So I know that building inside and out. I know the back. My mom and dad have been to Comic-Con twice. So they haven't been as much, but they've been once just to go to the city because the whole city is transformed, and they also snuck in once.
Enough to recognize the place.
But they, and that's a whole nother story. Like, how do just a regular pair of people that don't know anything about this sneak into San Diego Comic-Con without badges? But that's they talk about San Diego Comic-Con on television in the news like being the most secure place ever, like for security, and these just two strange elderly people just walk in.
You have too many people there for
it's an interesting story. But so they've only been twice. But when you saw the steps, when they're fighting on those tiered steps, my mom was like, hey, that's the backside of San Diego Comic-Con. That's where we snuck in. So it's another thing where, like, this is for the fans. Like, only people would know that have been to San Diego Comic-Con. And clearly it was done on purpose, in my opinion, to kind of pull at, like, the nerd strings. And I wrote about that, how interesting that is. The fight scene happens. I laugh, and I talked to you about this over Messenger the last night and saying, oh, yeah, I love seeing, which what I was afraid of, stunt double Picard running, because the scene when they're trying to get inside, it's all from the back of his head, even though he's talking, and it's clearly a man much younger, and it looks bad. And then, of course, they address that going up the stairs where he's old, and he's give me a second, we leave. There's a fight on top of the building. She goes into synthetic kind of activation mode. The fight itself is cool, as an action scene goes. You don't get that on TNG. You don't get that. It felt very Discovery in that sense.
Yeah.
She dies. She gets blowed up Terminator style in a move that doesn't make any sense to me. The Romulan gets knocked down. They win. He spits green acid at her.
Yeah.
Or does he throw it? It looks like he
spits it.
He spits it like some sort of reptilian monster.
Like something from Jurassic Park, yeah.
Right. And it starts eating away at the disruptor rifle she picked up and her face. And I'm like, oh, this is interesting. And to me, I'm like, okay, up until this point, we don't know who the fuck she is. Picard thinks she's Data's daughter. We don't know. I'm like, oh, we're going to get a Terminator moment, right? We're going to get her skin partially peel away, and we're going to get a look at something that looks like Data, right? We're going to get some sort of positronics looking thing like First Contact.
Yes, where they're replacing his
right, because the injury
skin.
He gets, and then it gets pulled off in the explosion in the warp core, and it's that positronic thing. I'm like, oh, cool, we're going to get that. No, she fucking takes a bullet and she's dead. She blowed up in a very big explosion, enough to knock Picard back, something that doesn't actually happen, but whatever. Television. He gets knocked back
and knocked unconscious.
Knocked unconscious. I'm like, oh, cool, okay. They're gonna fuck the meta. What are we gonna do here? They're like, fuck you, fans, right? Like,
yeah.
I thought that might have been an interesting twist because, oh, look, we're building this character up and for the fans kind of to go nuts over and look for leaks, and then we're going to kill him off and do something totally different. I was like, oh, that could be something. He wakes up back home, no explanation, right? This show has been just explaining ad nauseum, trying to overload you. He gets home, which is in another continent.
Yes.
Right, because they're at the Daystrom, right? Did they go there? No, they're somewhere.
That's where he goes immediately after he wakes up.
But they're not in France. And so he gets home with his two Romulan buddies. They wake him up, and he cries. He said, Daj, which is the girl, she's dead. I screwed up. I fucked up. And I was like, oh, cool. Now we're getting interesting. And the first thing coming out of their mouths is, what girl? What happened? And they tell him, and it's a fairly quick beat, but I think it was the girl that was with him tells Picard when he wakes up, like, there was no one on the feeds.
With you.
You
just fell over.
You just tripped and fell. And she directly, I remember, says, the camera saw you running and fall. And I go, okay, well, we have something's inside, and they can change the footage, whatever. But the fight itself wasn't a small fight. And what I'm talking about is that there's disruptor fire going on.
Oh yeah, an explosion.
And that massive explosion. And I'm talking massive. And Picard isn't and Dodge aren't in a isolated spot. They're on top of the roof at a major facility.
Yes.
And when he goes
And
to
they
that
showed all the
facility,
people there too.
they showed all the people. There were hundreds of people, civilians, uniformed people. Like, this was the middle of the day, very active. They go on the roof and this huge explosion, and they come back and they say, well, none of that got recorded. And I could tell you, like, that maybe they don't have detectives, maybe they're just dumbasses in the future. Someone had to see something, and that's when it upset me. Now, thankfully, the show gets good after that, but it really, really upset me. And then quickly, the show gets towards like its ending coda. It starts picking up. It starts getting interesting. And the necklace she was wearing, apparently she's a twin.
Because they have to be made in pairs.
Because they talk about some sort of DNA thing, which is Data's not a real thing. Data's not a pair. There was 3 of them.
And they were all made at different times. Again, doesn't make sense. But she talks to her mom before she goes back to Picard the second time. Her mom knows about Picard. So clearly there's some sort of cover-up or something's being done. But she doesn't go to her sister, contact her something about it. She doesn't mention that, just like, oh, I have a sister. Maybe something's, maybe she's in danger. In my mind, if I'm activated, right, as a sleeper agent and I'm doing all this shit, I would probably wonder, like, oh shit, is my twin sister too? Because that's like, we're talking like movie stuff here now. Yeah. Like, oh, if you have a twin, well, clearly you're going to do something with the twin, you'd be concerned. We cut to the end, and her is the same actress, because it's her twin, is there, shows up, but we get an extended scene of a Romulan craft landing, and like, it's a Borg cube. It's clearly Borg. Oh yeah.
Walks up to her, and they have this conversation. At this point, we know that Picard knows there's a twin, and the Romulans apparently are trying to kill her, but the Romulans now have acid breath. Whole lot of stuff is happening, guys. Gets in the Borg cube, and he talks to this lady who is Dodge's sister, the twin, and he gets all lovey-dovey and like close to her, and like, oh, you fix people, you fix broken people. This is another painful line. The last thing you want to do is fix someone that's broken on your time off. And she's like, no, it's what I'd love. I love fixing people, because that's, relationships are all about fixing the other person. And then it pulls back, and it's a Borg cube, and apparently she's like fixing either the Borg themselves or whatever. But this is like the Romulans have captured a Borg cube, or Romulan separatists, whatever the case may be. And it cuts to an end. And right off the bat it's just that for a 45-minute show, it feels like 2 completely different episodes written by 2 completely different groups of people.
Out of curiosity, is it the same people that write Discovery?
I don't think so. I could be wrong, but it just felt like the first part was the initial idea phase, and then there was a break in production or something, and things were like tweaked, and the second half like starts moving again, because it's paced, at least in my opinion, really, really weirdly, and it pulls out on the Borg cube. Now, I felt like it's not a long episode to 45 minutes, but I still feel like they could have gone and cut like 10 or so minutes out of that, and we wouldn't be missing much.
Probably.
And it goes from, I guess the beginning would be considered more traditional TNG, like kind of a slower paced episode, which I'm not against, but it's going to take a little coaxing because of how Star Trek has treated me in the past with all this action stuff. Yeah. But then the ending starts feeling like Discovery again, with all this action and ships and all this stuff. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense for what Picard should be doing. And it feels like a show for diehard TNG fans, and that CBS is hoping like we'll commit to this. You know what I mean? Like, we got 10 episodes, we're going to commit to this, because they're going to spread them out. So you're going to have a couple months of subscription, and hopefully you forget about it and keep watching. And then maybe those Star Trek purists that are here for Picard, because my favorite shot and scene of the entire episode was the Enterprise D footage that comes
that's
up.
about my dad liked too.
And I was like, oh, that's cool. Same thing. Me and my mom both were like, oh, cool. It's all CG.
They were in
didn't quite look right, but
Yeah, it didn't look like right because it's all CG modeled,
but
right?
it's supposed to be a dream, so whatever.
Yeah, it's a dream, so you can get away with it. But it's still like the galaxy. It looks cool, and that was our favorite part. But it does feel like with only 10 episodes, I don't feel like the pacing is quite found its footing yet. And I would use the home movies for shows, is what I do.
Mhm.
You have to give a show 5 episodes before you know you'll love it or hate it. And in the world of these limited series, I don't know if we can do that so much. Like, and I mean that by, it's a thing Brendan Small said when he made the TV show Home Movies. He's like, people hated home movies, he said, and it's
Like
on the
the first
DVD
one?
extras. He's like,
3 or 4 episodes.
they
yeah.
just hated it. And then he said, look, but after like you watch 5 episodes, could be in any order, could be at any time.
Mhm.
You're just like, oh, now I'm in. And he said, and I've used that defense for a lot of shows. Like when a TV show is like, oh, this is bad. It's like, okay, I like the actor, I like the actress, or something about it. I'll give it 5 episodes.
I usually go like 3 episodes, not counting the first one, but
right. And you have to give something a little bit of breathing room. And there are a lot of areas that this could go, but not in 10 episodes. And I'm concerned that because this is Star Trek Picard and not a traditional Star Trek show, that this entire season arc feels like just one really long TNG episode. You know what I mean? Like Star Trek was like Monster of the Week sort of thing. They'd be one place, something would happen. They'd be someplace else, something would happen.
Anomaly of the week.
Right. The old saying in television, Monster of the Week sort of thing. And then the season finales would be 2-parters to get you to come back. Or then maybe there'd be a mid-season break or something. You know what I mean? Like
with a cliffhanger.
There was rarely ever like 2 or 3 episodes back to back. There were connecting themes and people and bits through all of them, but it was anomaly of the week. And I feel like Picard might wear thin if it's one plot point drug on for 10 episodes. We know it's been picked up for season 2, but I don't know. And I think the biggest thing for me is that I don't know if you can really ever go home again. Once something ends, it ends. Now you can come back to it in the modern sense of if the show's been off the air for 2 or 3 years and everyone jumps back into it. You know what I mean? Like Community goes off the air, Yahoo picks them up.
Futurama went off.
There's not a long enough break where the creative minds are in a different position, right? Because that's growth as individuals. No matter what you think of Kurtzman and these people, they revitalized Star Trek with TNG. They destroyed it, going into Voyager. Like they're angels themselves. Regardless, some 30 years have passed for some of them, if not less because of Voyager, but still 20 years. They're different people looking back. And I think the most notable thing in my review that I said was that Picard feels written like Picard in YouTube compilations. And what I mean by that is when you go to YouTube compilations of Captain Picard, and you're going to get these incredible speeches. You're going to get these incredible moments of like, he figures it out. I've got you. Or you're going to get these speeches about morality and ethics and being the better people, right? These really cool moments that only happened in certain episodes.
Yes.
And you forget that Picard was still a person in between that. And he wasn't always, I'm going to give like Kenny from South Park or Kyle from South Park speech at the end of every episode.
No.
He chose his battles. He knew when to walk away. Sometimes he was wrong, all yada, yada. But it feels like the show is written from the point of someone that's only seen Picard in these clips and it mentions that in the stay tuned for what's coming this season. Like it literally someone says, they told me you'd love to give speeches, and he laughs. Like, no, he didn't. He just did them at the right times. And so it doesn't feel like a fleshed out character anymore. It feels like we're just watching Picard. Like, oh, we're going to give you the best of Picard. I don't want, that was the funnest part of Picard.
Yeah.
It was the moments where he didn't understand how to deal with kids. And, that was
that's encountered at Farpoint. Yeah.
It was like learning to trust, like, and then other captains and admirals coming on the ships, like, how do you run your ship like this? Like, there were failures and things not done traditionally, even though he was a straight-laced kind of person, that made him interesting by himself. Making him Captain Picard's, and I'm doing air quotes, feels like a disservice to the character over those 7 years.
Yeah, like how many were him just puttering on about how he used to be big into xenoarchaeology or whatever?
Yeah, like not even like not mentioned at all.
Yeah,
like his true passion, or that episode where they bring up like Sir brings that weird like vase like fat man thing, and he's like, this is pre whatever era, or this is post,
10,000 years
this
old.
is 10, this shouldn't exist, you know, the stuff like that. Not even mentioned that he loves archaeology. He's just on the vineyard because that was the Q episode that ended everything.
Yeah,
that's the only reason he's at
All
Chateau Picard. It was like, oh look, do you remember? It was like a giant episode of member berries. It's like, oh, do you remember this? Do you remember this? Do you remember this? But we're not going to give you the stuff that actually made Picard Picard. He's just a broken old man, kind of wants to get back out there.
Member berries are not a filling thing.
It just, and it in the end is how I kind of wrapped everything up, was just that Star Trek Picard like plays it safe almost to a fault, while still worrying fans with the potential of upending the entire canon.
Yes.
It plays it safe because it wants to be slower, but it introduces canon stuff that will just be a goddamn nightmare if it isn't.
I already see it becoming
handled.
A nightmare.
And it's like, as soon as the synth stuff came up, I'm like, well, fuck it. We should have left TNG alone. We should just stop. That's not that part. It's not that world of science fiction. It's a different era. You know, you have Blade Runner over here. You got Star Trek over here. You know, and then you have the JJ verse, which had like robot people. It's like, and then Discovery was, you don't need this stuff.
The other night, when we were playing Age of Discovery on Star Trek Online, a lot of the writers for Discovery seem to just really want to write Doctor Who.
Yes.
Which is a problem.
Which is a problem.
It's not Star Trek.
Discovery comes from a position of, and I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing or hate it, but it comes from a position of like, look at what we're doing, look how cool it is.
And it isn't, because it's,
you know what I mean? Like it's, and I'm sure that plays well to a younger demographic that has never seen Star Trek. It's like, oh, this is cool. And you know, they grew up with like Star Wars essentially, and pew pews all the time as their science fiction, because there hasn't really been good science fiction, at least in the mainstream 90s and on. You know what I mean?
It's hard for me to argue that.
Right. It's like you have a generation like TNG, you had a generation that was raised on Star Trek.
Once TNG and Voyager and Enterprise, and most importantly Stargate, ended.
Yeah. you didn't have on TV,
that.
You had no options really. Like now it's different. You have you have the Expanse going on, you have all sorts of different, like even like the Orville, and you have Black Mirror playing with space stuff. Like there is Ad Astra just came out with like Brad Pitt. Like there's science fiction kind of coming back in, but during the 90s it was Star Wars.
Yeah.
And up to now it's Star Wars. And let's face it, little kids now aren't watching TV.
No.
Right? They're watching YouTube, and they're watching streaming stuff, and they're going to movies and on their phones. So they're not. They're privy
to the Darth Sidious broadcast that wasn't in the movie.
They like the pew.
It was in Fortnite, but not in the movie.
They like the pews, and I don't blame Discovery for doing that to try to draw new viewers in. But for Picard, I'm worried.
You can't have it both ways.
Me. You can't have it both ways.
You can't do nostalgia and also give the pews.
You can't do both.
You can't do both.
I would have been so happy if Star Trek Picard ended without a single shot being fired. If you wanted to, the flashback scenes I thought were fine. They're giving you something, right? Move forward.
Those were probably my favorites. The bits with him and Data.
Right. Like there's some cool bits. Like cool. We're calling back. There's something about him we're going to learn. Didn't need any of the pew fighting. Didn't need any of the what the hell is that show we used to review that Trevor used to review? Oh God, The Americans. and we didn't need
Oh,
sleeper
I never
agent
watched a
shit.
single episode of that.
We didn't need any sleeper agents. We didn't need any Black Widow sort of stuff. No.
We
So
didn't
we'll
need the myth arc from, I think it was what was the oh god, they made the movie Serenity, Firefly.
Oh, Firefly, yeah. Let
Because isn't that
it's all, yeah. Just let
where the
Star Trek
girl
be Star Trek.
who's like maybe 98 pounds soaking wet can kick
And
everybody's
I
ass?
think I'm starting to believe myself more and more that you cannot make Star Trek anymore, and that Discovery is the way of the future that we're going to get, simply because
I think-
cultures and things change, and I totally understand that. And I don't even hate it, because your Star Trek, it's the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle syndrome.
Yeah.
That's what my brother likes to call it.
Hmm.
There is a new generation of Ninja Turtle shows for every generation. People are like, well, this show was great, or this show wasn't that good. Why did it only last this long? And that was like, well, because your core audience that is buying this stuff is going to do that throughout these 4 to 5 maybe years max.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're going to move on to something else. Probably shorter. Now that shows are shorter because the attention spans and there's so much else to do. Like these TMNT shows, 3-4 years maybe, as opposed to the first one where it just went on till fucking it just overstayed its welcome. But your TMNT can still be yours. Like mine is still the Saturday morning cartoon. I have people older than me that know the comics, and that's theirs. And you have these CGI ones that are terrible from Michael Bay, but those are those are kids, like that's their turtles. In 10-15 years, when those get remade, they're going to be like, why do these turtles look so funny? And you have the same thing with Star Trek.
Yeah.
You can leave Disco alone because you have TNG. You can leave Voyager alone because you have DS9. You can leave DS9 alone because you have TOS. You know what I mean? Like, who gives a shit? And Picard becomes a problem because you can't have TNG anymore if they upend the canon. You know what I mean? Because everything happening in Picard is now, when you rewatch TNG, going to influence that. And that was the danger of bringing back Picard in this way, as opposed to putting him back on a ship of some kind. Because you're going to watch Picard and might hate it. You might be ambivalent to it or whatever. But if you go to rewatch TNG, Picard's influence is now going to be in the back of your head going, oh, look how he's acting here. Or why didn't they notice this, that, and the other? And so while Disco doesn't mess with your Trek, Picard might mess with your Trek. And that might be the biggest offense of this series if it doesn't kind of find its footing and figure out what to do. And I don't know if I want a season 2 out of this. And I don't mean that in a bad way. The show could have been great, and it might still be great as a whole.
If it had just been a miniseries, though?
If it had just been a limited series, if it was a one and done, I might have been like, cool. They're doing like the British thing, like just give me a good season, and move on. You know, go to someone else, do something else. But knowing that there's a season 2, I don't know what else I would want out of Picard once he figures out this and gets ready to go back there, because now he's like 90 years old. I know Star Trek timeline doesn't matter because they go into like they live to 130 or 120, whatever. But after this finishes, like, what else are you going to have Picard do in Star Trek Picard? Once he finishes, once he finds himself again, are you going to go and be TNG and just make him an ambassador that does episodes of the week? I don't think you can or want to.
No, they don't want to.
And so
they clearly don't want to.
The only thing I know of season 2 is that Guinan's back, right? Because he invited her when he was on The View, and like, which I'm all for. I think she's great every time she was on screen, but
yeah,
what are you going to do? Is now season 2 going to be, I'm going to bring all my friends and let's just have fun and do things again? You know what I mean? Like, do we really want that? Like, at least Guinan's interesting, but I don't care. I have TNG. I have it. I can watch it whenever I want. Don't mess that up for me, please. Please don't. I love John Delancey, but what are you going to bring? Just Q back popping in to do things? Let's stop.
Well, he did love to troll Picard.
He did. It's like, I get it, but like, you can't go back home after you do this with Picard, because the only way to do it is to give him a ship. And at this point, I don't know if that's in the cards for him. So that's Star Trek Picard. It airs Thursdays on CBS All Access. C plus. Thanks for this 2-hour, however long rant.
We've gone for about an hour and like 6 minutes.
We started 11:29 when I started recording, and it's an hour. So this will be split up for sure.
Yeah.
So let us know. Are we off base? Am I an idiot? I mean, probably. I mean, maybe.
I personally
you can't say, like, we're both Star Trek fans.
I think you can still do Star Trek. You just need to get the right people to do it.
The people with the Star Trek license don't know how to do Star Trek.
Yes, that is the problem, and it's the same problem Star Wars.
I mentioned this when we started this, like the people and like Kurtzman and these other people, and even Brandon Braga, like these people, like they're their own worst enemies at this point, because they did amazing things with TNG. They did amazing things with DS9. They got lazy with Voyager, right? The premise of Voyager was fantastic. They're lost. Oh, cool. We're going to go back to this monster of the week.
Never lives up to it, though.
We're going to be a monster of the week, and we're going to do cool things. You just ended up getting fucking trash Klingons and just trash versions of everyone else, right? And it never lived up to, like, oh, no, you're lost and do this stuff.
And you only have, like, 38 torpedoes. And
you only got 38 torpedoes and 8,000 shuttlecrafts. They just stopped. And clearly they knew these things, but it's in the service of the script. And I know how the scripts worked on Voyager. They worked a little bit like this on TNG towards some of the weirder. If you saw a really bad TNG episode, it was an episode they bought. It was a purchased episode. And so what happens...
Or it was a phase 2 script, because...
you have like the Bible, and you have these core episodes. You know what you're going to do, but you need to fill in gaps, like downtime, dead episodes. And so they buy scripts. Or what you do, and I work in this a little bit with TV stuff, you write a script, the show's been on for a little bit, and you send it in, right? And if they like it, they buy it, and the options from there are they go 3 ways. They either buy it and do whatever they want with it, right? Your name's still on there. They buy it, and they send it to you, and they say, you have, we need this in 4 days rewrites for this episode, because they hire you to do it because it's your episode. Or they do it all. They buy it and they do it all themselves, whatever it was. Is that 2 or 3? It's getting late. I'm very tired. But and you got some of the worst episodes out of it in that sense. Like the ones where the computer gets infected with masks, and they're all wearing masks, and Enterprise turns into an Aztec temple. The one where Troy turns into a fish. You got a lot more of them on Voyager because they got lazy.
Threshold was a phase 2 script.
And a lot of those were their own writing, but the team behind Star Trek, and I don't even blame them, they were tired. You're talking 3 separate shows, like over a decade, they were tired, they didn't care. Enterprise, God bless them, they at least tried to do something new and like be before everything. But again, same people involved, missed the mark.
Season's pretty good.
Right, it got real good. I wish it was that good at the beginning, so you would still be on the air. And so the people that made Star Trek great and then killed it are still around, and because of that, you can't have the Star Trek that you wanted. And you give it to totally new people. They're going to be younger people. They're going to be people that watch the show, but also were influenced with other things, and you get Discovery. And so, depending on how Picard does, I stick to my saying that you can't have Star Trek anymore. And the best Star Trek you can have is just go watch the Orville.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion.
Coming to Hulu. And so that's let us know if we're on point, if we're on point. I think there's a lot to be discussed about Picard. I think a lot of people that review the show were incredibly kind to it because the reviewers now grew up, like, are probably my age, that grew up with Star Trek in their prime TNG, and like it kind of defined them in a way. And so I love Star Trek more than anyone probably in the world. I know as much there is to know, but I live by the saying that if you can't call the bullshit in the thing you love, then you don't actually love it. You're just a fanboy. Right? I love Star Trek, but I'll be the first one to tell you that some of that shit is dumb as fuck. I will criticize whatever I can. And if someone tells me, hey, fucking Enterprise sucked, I'll say, yeah, I still like it though, so that's cool.
Yeah.
If someone says like Star Wars is lame and your first response is, well, fuck you, buddy, it's the greatest thing ever, I don't consider you a fan. I consider you a fanboy. Same thing with console, same thing with anything.
Mm-hmm.
So to be able to be critical of it, I think is good. And I didn't see a lot of criticality from some of these reviewers who had some pretty short things and just said, oh, he's back and better than ever and great, blah, 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 blah. I'm like
I'll do that when I'm doing news because it's better to err on the side of caution. But
it's just like, but come on, buddy. Like people are like, this is the best. I'm just like, this is a C+. It's all right. It's okay if you don't love it because it's not a movie. It's a television show. It has the potential to grow. And if it grows, we might have a different opinion of this come episode 10. And we're talking about this. And this eventually just becomes a Star Trek Picard podcast.
Yeah, we might have to separate it.
So we'll see. You might be getting a separate podcast from just on that, depending on how this section goes. But enough Star Trek. We got to move on. We'll keep the next couple of things short because I got to chop this up and get some videos out of this. But
fuck it. It's
for podcast
January.
people, you're still going on. Fuck it. It's January.